Today we are going to look at the crash of Airblue ED202, which is Pakistan's private airline. This crash happened on 28th of July 2010 at 9:41 a.m. There were 146 passengers on board with 6 crew members adding up. This flight was en route to Islamabad from Karachi Jinnah International Airport, and 152 passengers died in that plane crash. Let's move on to next slide and see what actually happened. Flight ED202 departed from Karachi Jinnah International Airport for Islamabad Benazir Bhutto International Airport on 28th of July 2010. As soon as the flight was in the sky, the captain started questioning his first officer about his knowledge, as he was new to commercial flying. This didn't go well. The captain was quite harsh and used a quite snobbish tone with the first officer. The reports called this what the captain did was a humiliation session, and this continued for an hour to be precise. After all that, when they entered Islamabad's airspace, the weather got very harsh and visibility got quite low. Due to this, ATC instructed the flight to apply visual circling procedure and allotted runway 12 for landing. In this procedure, captain would line with runway 30 using the ILS, and then once near runway, he would turn to the right, then circle the airport by making left turns, which would put them exactly where they needed to be line up with runway 12. If you mess up anything, you'd end up far away from the runway. I'll explain you why did I say that. The captain decided that he'd be flying this circling approach with the nav mode. In the nav mode, the plane just follows the flight path that you have programmed into the computer, and so the captain asked the first officer to program in a few waypoints into flight management system. The waypoint that captain asked the first officer to program in that flight management system were wrong, but because the humiliation session happened, so the first officer didn't question the captain's choice or captain's approach to landing. The thing is, they weren't supposed to use these waypoints as it was unauthorized. Why unauthorized? Because there was a safety zone around the Islamabad International Benazir Bhutto International Airport, which was also known as Islamabad International Airport, because there was a Pakistan Air Force Air Base, one, and the other was there were hills, Margala Hills, where this plane crash happened. Soon the plane was on the ILS for runway 30, and the ATC cleared them to descend. And to perform the circling approach to runway 12, the captain asked about the right-hand approach again. The captain continued to take his plane lower and lower as he wanted to descend to 2,000 feet, but he was reminded by the first officer that the safe altitude was 2,500 feet. After a while, the captain commanded a right turn, breaking off from the pattern of approach to runway 30. As the jet flew the pattern, it started to drop to lower limit of 2,500. It dropped to 2,300 feet. This was very low. The captain commanded a left turn to 300 through the autopilot. He had already activated the autopilot when they were on their way to runway 12. As they did this, the ATC warned the crew that they were near a no-fly zone, which was not a safe zone, as I told you earlier. By now, the flight was 5 miles to the north of the airport, and a computerized voice in the cockpit said, "Terrain ahead, terrain ahead, terrain ahead." They needed to turn left even more to avoid the mountains right now. They were flying away from the airport as well, which wasn't originally planned due to the weather conditions. The first officer knew exactly what was happening. They were getting too close to the hills north of the airport known as Margalla Hills. The first officer reminded the captain, "Sir, higher. Ground has reached." "Sir, terrain ahead. Terrain ahead." The captain was trying his best to turn away. The captain began to get anxious. The human factor, now comes the human factor. He became anxious, and cause he became anxious, he took a wrong decision, a wrong turn. He wanted to take left turn, but in attempt to turn to the left, the captain turned the heading knob of the autopilot to left, but the airplane didn't turn to left. A bit later, airplane started to turn to the right, and when the airplane turned to the right, the captain tried his best to recover. He pulled back. He tried to steady the plane. It appeared to be working as well. They were climbing, but in the cockpit, the captain was still anxious and stressed. The plane then starts to lose altitude again. First officer says, "Sir, we are going down." It was the last thing he said. The plane flew into the Margalla Hills north of the airport, and 152 souls were compromised with that approach. Now, I'll hand over this to Natalie to explain what what happened and how did a one human factor, his arrogance, his lack of professionalism affected the crash.
Go.
There were three main human factors that I would like to speak about today regarding AirBlue 202. There are mental strain, in-flight decision making and planning, and the trans-cockpit authority gradient. Mental strain and fatigue factors. The impact of mental strain on the captain due to low visibility alongside flying an unusual approach created an extra layer of stress and strain on the pilot. Flying an unusual approach as the captain couldn't see as far as he usually could was making it difficult to navigate through mountain terrain, and rather than engaging in the ILS like he usually would be able to, he wasn't able to this time because he was on the opposite side of the terrain, meaning that it was a chance he had a loss of situational awareness. According to the flight crash investigation report, the weather contributed to the mental strain on the flight crew. So I know weather isn't usually a human factor, but in this case the report actually considered it to impact that. So as the report says, although the aircrew captain was fit to undertake the flight on the day of the incident, his portrayed behaviour and efficiency was observed to have deteriorated with the inclement weather at the destination. In-flight decisions and planning factors. Contrary to the air traffic service briefing and established procedures of a circle to land runway 12, the captain had insisted that he use his own set waypoints instead of using the predetermined and existing approach procedures which was required of all aircraft entering the airfield. During the last 70 seconds before the crash, despite calls from the air crash service and the enhanced ground warning proximity system sounding 21 times and pull-up warnings sounding 15 times, the captain continued his pre-selected route and didn't apply the takeoff go-around thrust, contrary to the established standard operating procedures. The captain did not execute the terrain escape manoeuvre, which could have been due to panic, though it seems there may have been another factor in his decision-making process. A possible factor could have been that a direct competitor airline had been the previous aircraft to have landed safely at that airport, so this could have created some more pressure on the captain. These actions then led to further procedures being ignored and were major contributing factors to the crash. If the flight crew had followed procedure, the crash could have been avoided. Cockpit authority gradient factors. It is important that the crew take on their appropriate roles, otherwise small relationship problems can become reinforced. The captain early in the flight became demeaning to the first officer by beginning to quiz him, even though he was qualified for the role. This instilled distrust between the captain and the first officer, making it difficult for the first officer to complete his role appropriately. These actions led to the first officer not following correct procedures and taking control of the aircraft when the captain was not in control or behaving appropriately by ignoring the enhanced ground warning proximity system from the aircraft and the verbal distress comments and direct questions from the first officer. This further tilted the trans-cockpit authority gradient, which was already out of the Goldilocks zone due to the age and experience of the captain and the first officer. The first officer remained impassive and failed to assert himself appropriately due to a non-congenial environment in the cockpit, and simply remained a passive bystander in the cockpit. He did not participate as an effective team member and failed to correct errors of his captain assertively, in line with the teaching of the crew resource management.
It was also noted in the investigation that the pilot said to the first officer, "Let the ATC guy say whatever he wants to." This shows a scary amount of nonchalance from the captain. That one phrase, "let him say whatever he wants to," say perfectly the captain's attitude throughout the flight. He just didn't care to take care of other people's opinion, whether his first officer, whether the ground crew. What we believe and what is known for successful landing and departure is a mix of ground crew and flight crew together to make a successful flight. In the end, I'd say this we all our group would say this crash, in our opinion, comes down to the attitude of the captain. This really sad thing had multiple people asking him to consider his way of doing things. His first officer, his ATC, he just brushed his concerns and pleases aside. The ATC knew the flight was in trouble, but they crashed. This was also known as case of controlled flight into terrain, which means that this could easily be avoided, but due to the captain's arrogance, unprofessional behavior, and the tension in the cockpit, it was it was not avoided. It's very sad to even report about this because I was at that time in that city near those mountains having my birthday celebration. But as soon as we knew this, we were very sad. Uh, the captain committed serious violations of procedures and breached many flying disciplines, which put the aircraft in an unsafe condition over dangerous terrain, especially when they were on lower altitude. So, how could this crash would have been avoided? So, AirBlue should have prepared or trained their captains or pilots with better crew resource management, and the captain should follow proper SOPs. The captain should not doubt, not only captain, even first officer or any other person working on the plane shouldn't doubt about the other colleague, because if they had doubts, he wouldn't be working for that airline or for that company. And you should always listen to ATC and follow their guidelines rather than blindly believing on your intuitions or experience in your arrogance. Over to Rain now. Thank you.
The Air Blue 202 accident is an example of what can happen to an aircraft when the cohesive environment postulated by an ideal trans-cockpit authority gradients are not kept, leading to a series of human errors that can ultimately end in fatal consequences. The case of a senior pilot berating his junior officer started very early in AirBlue 202 flight, when the recovered cockpit voice recorder indicated the senior pilot arrogantly berated his junior officer's capabilities, making the latter passive and disengaged to his duties and responsibilities, including, among others, to question or rectify several violations made by the senior pilot to standard procedures. The senior captain, feeling of superiority, who brazenly ignored and violated control tower directives, did not make his seniority rank work for his favor, and has in fact added to a series of human errors and confusions in his judgments, leading to the crash. The human errors pervading at the hostile working environment of the cockpit of the AirBlue Flight 202 may have rendered the flight a very unsafe one, even on the most ideal weather day. and is certainly made fatal by the inclement weather prevailing at the time of the accident. A cohesive working environment hierarchy inside an aircraft is an absolute necessity to ensure a safe and efficient flight, where technical as well as crew staff work in a multidisciplinary harmony. Crew Resource Management, known as CRM, is a set of training procedures for use in many environments to mitigate the devastating effects of human error. It uses training materials that enhances the cognitive and interpersonal skills needed to manage the flight within an organized aviation system. This reduces communication barriers and problems like the ones that happened to the Airblue 202, and instead foster teamwork and cooperation.